That looks fine from back here.
Thank you. Yeah, I always wonder how the people who don't have a PhD in engineering live with this stuff. Okay, so yeah, at this time of the week, I probably don't have to do this very much. Please note well is what Barry would say at this point. And we have a pretty packed agenda. Any changes to the agenda? Except that we also have a little bit of spillover from Monday, which we will start first. But before we do that, I have a little announcement.
Carsten, even before that, we still need note takers.
Yes.
Could you ask?
Note takers.
Doesn't work either.
Well, we have our default note taker, and
we have one.
so
Any other
Matthias is
volunteer?
doing the other half.
Write down some gibberish, I guess.
Yeah, so it's the best adventure is to do it with Etherpad. It only crashes about 10 times per hour, but you can take great notes in the rest of the time. Okay, so the announcement I wanted to make is in auth 48 since today, so we already know the RFC number. And we just have to finish the auth 48, which is difficult when most people are on vacation, but I think somehow we will do that in the next 48 hours, I'm sure. That's what auth 48 means. Okay, the other announcement that we were asked to make is we have been doing CoAP interrupt testing as a working group a lot until about 2013, when CoAP became stable, and it has been approved. Now there are various organizations doing that, and one very interesting organization is FInterop, which is an EU-financed project, and they are trying to build interrupt testing environments that actually already know that there is something called the internet. So they build environments where you can do interrupt testing over the internet. This is relatively easy for application layer protocols, but they actually do it down to the radio layer by shipping golden devices around that can be used for that interrupt testing. So everything else goes over the internet, but you also need this golden device to make the whole chain work. But we don't need that. So for interrupt testing, please have a look at this site, and you have to be a little bit patient. It is an EU project, so yeah, sometimes the presentation is a little bit dry, but there is interesting stuff happening there. Okay, should we? Is anyone from the DOTS people here?
Roman's here.
Roman's here. Good.
Roman's here. We have Andrew.
Okay, so maybe we actually do this one first and then jump back to the cinema part. So the reason I have asked the DOTS people to, you can come to the front. I just talk why you come to the front. The reason we have asked the DOTS people to say something is because they are actually a customer of CoAP, and they are an unconventional customer because they are not interested in light bulbs.
Yeah, and thank you for timing the agenda, and I'm only going to take a couple of minutes. We don't really have time for kind of technical discussion, but I really came here asking for help. Our CoAP protocol document is going to be starting second working group last call, so we're getting close to the end, and we could take a look at your expert review, given your expertise with that. So the DOTS working group is in the security area, and I only actually have 2 slides. So I would first point you to the top to orient you on our use case. what we are primarily trying to do is standardize the signaling associated with denial of service mitigation. And it's a fairly kind of simple thing we're trying to do, which is we want to standardize the communication of someone that's under attack asking someone else to help them do the mitigation. So in this diagram, walk and point a little bit, there is some victim that's getting attacked, and then architecturally, maybe it's an upstream provider, maybe it's some cloud packet scrubbing service is going to be able to do some mitigation, and then there's the opportunity to do that transitively. And so we have created this notion of a DOTS client and a DOTS server, and they can be combined architecturally to be a DOTS gateway, which is just a back-to-back. And the DOTS client is the thing that asks a DOTS server for help. And at a scope is how the actual infrastructure communicates with a client, but practically this is a switch, this may be a specialized device, this may be an application server, a load balancer, or whatnot. And then it asks a DOTS server, which again, it could be any kind of network infrastructure, and then that DOTS server communicates with the piece of the infrastructure that can actually do the mitigation, but how it actually does the tasking to kind of rate limit or to do blocking, again, is out of scope. It's really just the communication of saying, hey, I'm under attack. The server says, got it, I'm going to do something about it. The client saying, hey, I'm still under attack. The server says, yeah, I'm trying to do something about it. The client saying, hey, please stop, I think I'm good. Or the server saying, hey, I'm not seeing that attack anymore. Are you good? Can I stop? And so to facilitate that communication, we have developed two protocols. There is a signal channel, and then there's a data channel. So let me first start with the data channel. In this workflow that I described up here, there's a concept of there is peacetime, and then there is time under attack. So the peacetime is when the victim is not being attacked, and the attack time is when the victim is experiencing a denial of service attack. So the data channel built over RESTconf is really the communication between the client and the server to do various kind of provisioning. Again, this is envisioned to be done at peacetime. And then under attack circumstances, there is the signal channel, which is the COAP protocol that I'd love your review on, which is used to kind of signal, hey, the attack has kind of started, please stop the mitigation, and to exchange that information about what is occurring. All right. Makes sense? Any quick questions about that setup? Okay, so I would point you to, and I have a list of references to the DOTS signal channel. We are about to start working group last call this coming Monday. We're going to open it for kind of 2 weeks, and we would love your eyes on that particular kind of draft. I have various section numbers that point to various properties of how we have configured configured COAP and that communication. What drew us to COAP initially was we expected packet loss, no surprise, under that attack. We wanted non-confirmable messages. We wanted small messages, efficient message sizes. We use kind of examples of some of the methods that we used here. We have heartbeat kinds of things built into the protocol because, again, we expect to kind of lose a lot of traffic. And here are some of the other properties of that. Is that fair, Carsten, as an introduction? Okay, so I welcome you to please take a look at it as our COAP kind of experts. And the draft you want to take a look at is DOTS signal channel. And we will start a working group last call on Monday. I'll send a pointer to the mailing list if that's fair. And please track me down if you have any individual questions about this. I appreciate your time here.
Thanks, Roman. So who would be interested to actually have a look at this? Dave, Bill, Jaime. Ilpo is just raising his hand anyway. No? Okay. Good.
I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's, I touched it. Oh, that works much better even. So let's get back to the rest of the agenda.
Okay, so now with ZenML in practice done, of course, it's time to extend it. But this work actually has been ongoing already quite some time, originally in the OMA SpecWorks, and we already presented this draft first time at the London IETF. But what has changed since last time is that we are now reusing the base ZML media types. So the original version was proposing to register new media types to be used with patch and fetch, but it turned out that that is actually not necessary. We can just define new semantics for the same media types, and we can still get the same functionality of being able to update and fetch parts of a ZML document efficiently. The wildcard feature we left out, as discussed in the London meeting. That was maybe unnecessary complexity for the kind of gains that you are getting with that, and it's always nicer to have a simpler document. One comment we got relatively recently is that iPatch is actually most of the time the better way of using patch, the idempotent version of patch. So now the document is focusing throughout the text on iPatch and just mentions that the same semantics also work with the patch method. We also updated security considerations. So there is a risk with fetch and patch that a single fetch and patch operation may impact multiple resources. And if multiple resources have different access control rules, of course, you have to take the aggregate of the operation into account when you are evaluating those. So that's now explicit in the security considerations. Finally, it was discussed if we need operation codes for the patching. And in particular, it's simple to do replacing and adding, but if also like appending and deleting operations are needed. So for that, we did think about it quite a bit, and it seems that we can actually get away without operation codes. So a lot of the logic is still similar as it used to be, but we added a bit more text on what it means to appending new records to a patch and how you can potentially delete records from a patch. So how it works now is that when you do an add, you do a patch operation with a ZML record that has a name that doesn't exist in the pack originally. Then it means you are adding a new record. Also, the current text has maybe gives a bit wrong impression that time is always required. We're going to be updating that text shortly. Then append operation. So if you have multiple records with the same name, if you put there a different time than what exists in any of the existing records, this will then become an append operation. Replace works just like it used to be, but now we've just clarified it that you match the name if the patch record has a name. If it's another record on the target pack with the same name, that's a replace operation. Or if your patch record has name and time, both of them need to match on the target pack, and then it becomes a replace operation. So those all actually were already in the previous version, but now it's clarified how they are exactly working. A new feature in this version is this delete operation. It's using the same rules for matching, so the name or the name and time need to match, but you set the value to null. And that means that you want to delete a record from a pack. Because the ZML base RFC doesn't allow null values, this should be a safe way of using it. A few considerations on this mechanism are, the good thing is that it seems that we don't need the operation codes. So what we're considering originally, we would reserve one field for future extension operation codes. Now it seems that it's not necessary to even reserve that one field for it. And if we later feel that, okay, maybe we need some more extensions, well, we can always define a new media type that is very similar to this media type and has potentially these operations. So we still do have an extension point if we really need it. One downside of this way of patching is that you cannot add time to an existing record with a single patch operation. So if you have a record without time, you just cannot put there time because now it becomes an append. However, you can delete that record and put the record or replace the whole pack. So it's just you need to do two operations instead of one. But this seems like a reasonable trade-off. Adding time to an existing record seems like a corner case. And a few small to-be-dones. So clarifying the batch operations that I mentioned, this that the time is not needed always in a pack if it matches it already without. And then there was one comment that it's a bit confusing that the fetch and batch record terms are written all caps, so we'll make them not all caps, and it's more clear. We are not referring to the method because the batch and fetch record work with both patch and iPatch methods. But with that, we believe it's ready for working group adoption. Questions or comments?
So who has read a version of this document? 3? 4? I think Ari has read it too.
I'm Oyan too.
Who would be willing to provide a review? 3? Good. And who thinks this is something this working group should do after we have now finished CineML? All the same people all the time. Who thinks we should not be doing this? Peter is trying to control himself to not raise his hand. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so of course we will verify this on the list, but I'm seeing some interest here, and let's see whether we get those reviews, and if we get 1 or 2, then maybe we can do the formal adoption call.
Excellent, thank you.
Next. I have 2 slides that I will try to do really quickly, or do you want to do them? So we did something maybe not so bright when we did the IENA considerations for CineML. Or maybe the fact that we tried to cater for EXI was not so bright. Anyway, each time a new field is added, new field name is added to CineML, the XML schema needs to be changed, and the changed XML schema needs to get a new name. The schema in the document is called A, and maybe the next one will be called B. The idea is that an XE document can reference this schema by name at the start, because changing the schema means some of the serialization properties change, so you have to know what schema actually has been used for encoding something. Now the problem is that most registrants of field names don't care for EXI. So they don't have an expert who would be able to update that XML schema. And it already happened. Lightweight M2M registered VLO. And of course, they didn't care about the schema. So what the draft says is you don't have to update the schema. You keep it blank. And when finally a registrant comes along that does a new field and cares about XE, they can do a schema that does all the existing new fields and registers a new version for the schema, which would be B, together with their field name. And there is a slight weirdness because that schema, we right now don't really have a place where we can record that schema. The IENA registration process doesn't have a conventional place to keep updated documents like that. So the reason we are saying this is that right after CineML was approved, of course, Lightweight MGM came along and said, we want this new field, and we started to scratch our heads because they didn't understand the procedure either, and did something was wrong. I think they wrote B in the registration and didn't provide a schema or something like that. So yeah, we probably don't want to try to fix this in Auth48, but I think we still have to think a little bit about how we handle this. Jim.
Jim Schott, there's one step that I would like to be able to see in here, which is you shouldn't have to actually register a new field in order to actually register the schema. Because if you put 10 things in there and I come along and I want the schema, I should be able to do that.
Right. So that's a bug in the procedure. Alexei?
So considering the document is in Auth48 as of today, do you actually want to publish existing XE media types? Or do you want to remove it from the document and just move it to a separate document? So don't publish it in the current one. They just, at the moment, I'm ambivalent. I'm just offering you an option. It is a change in Auth48, and yes, we can just double check it on the mailing list, but what's the best thing going forward for XC?
I sure know what my answer to this question would be, but I think the working group might have a different mind.
Okay, how do you want to find out what's the working group?
Maybe ask today.
Let's keep the document as such and publish it, please. It's not really a bug. It's just how we want to do the procedure, who needs to do what work. I mean, this does not need to update the document per se if we do this. It's more like how do we arrange the expert registry.
Yeah. So maybe it's mostly a matter of creating awareness. So all players know that, and we know that when somebody approaches us and says, I want to do a new SNML tag, we not just say, that's easy, but we also say, do you need XC? To find out whether they need to exercise the second half or not. So maybe that's all that's actually needed. But lightweight M2M screwed this up slightly. And I think, is there a change request now for lightweight M2M, or was it published with a slight mistake in it?
And yeah, and lightweight M2M screwing it up. Yeah, it was me screwing it up actually. So it was didn't quite realize how much work it is to register EXI schema. But yes, so the latest approved version should not have that in place. So the request coming towards IANA will not request the EXI schema if everything went as planned.
Okay, so I still have an appointment with Michel to make. Maybe we can find a place to actually store this schema somewhere at IANA.
Yes, or it could be a core wiki or something. Yeah, but yeah, I agree. We need a place for the latest schema, or for all the schemas to be stored somewhere accessible. But I don't think we need to change the RFC to be.
I can ask an ignorant question because this is the first time I've seen it, so I'm still trying to process it. Will you need new media type for XC stuff, or is it just you will or you will not? If you have a new schema like this, XC with B in it, will you need new media type?
We have new media types, so the document registers media types.
Yeah,
we have them.
That's what I'm saying. Will you need to register another parallel set of them? Okay.
No. The registration of a new field name doesn't require a new media type. It's still the same media type, but in the file, in the object, you have this A, B, C, D thing, so you know what it actually is. So the media type is still SNML minus XC, or plus XC, or
MIME parameter?
minus XC.
MIME type parameter, maybe?
We discussed this and weren't too happy with something that was floating around separately from the actual document. So we put the schema identifier in XC as it is. The XC header has a place for that.
Yeah. I do remember looking at it, and I wasn't entirely confident about it, but I didn't know enough about, well, I still don't know enough about XC to, all right, okay.
I know way more about XC than I ever wanted to at this point.
Okay, so will you have some text or some draft about this, describing this shortly?
Well,
just to describe what the problem statement
is. It's all in the document. It's just the practical consequences are a little bit more involved than we thought. I mean, it failed on the first try, but it was a communication failure. It wasn't a failure with the procedure and the draft. It's just that the lightweight M2M people just didn't know that there was a question they had to think about.
Okay. But I'm still trying to figure out what the best thing about the document on Auth48. Maybe doing nothing is fine, but I need a little bit more convincing, if you know what
I can imagine that adding one or two sentences would help a lot. So maybe we can sit down and do these one or two sentences.
Okay.
Again, I just want to repeat that all these things that are in the slide are basically in the document, but maybe not as clearly that it's obvious for a registration. Yep. So it's not a technical or even procedural change. Maybe just clarifying what is already there.
Okay, so that was that. And yeah, now using the speaker microphone. I have been asked to present this. I'm going to hold it. We have heard about the stateless forward proxy option a few times in working group meetings here. And as with many things, when you think about it for a year or two, you get a few new ideas what it actually is about. And what happened is that since the document that is using this is now in working group last call, or has just finished working group last call, we were starting to think again. And this thinking, unfortunately, has had some results. But let me first explain what the point is. The point is when you have a proxy, normally the proxy forwards a request to the server, to the origin server. And while it's waiting for the response, it has to keep some state to be able to send back the response to the original client. So that's the normal operation of a proxy. And the problem in the 6-ish minimal draft is that this guy here actually is a very constrained system. So this is a joiner that wants to talk to the join authorization server, whatever it's called today, JRC, or I don't know what the abbreviation means. And this guy just happens to be a random light bulb that happens to be close to the joiner. So we don't want to burden this light bulb with keeping that state. In particular, after a power failure, I think we all think about power failures today, the situation may be that there are quite a few of these joiners coming in at the same time, so you don't have deterministic limit to the amount of state that might be needed for a very, very constrained system. So the idea is just to not keep the state, but to push it forward to the server and have it returned from the server with a response. And of course, there are some security considerations. You have to cryptographically protect it a little bit to make this happen. But this is manageable. So that's the basic idea. And the question is, what is the best way to send some state with a request that you actually get back together with a response? And if you know CoAP, the first thing that comes to mind is the token, because the token has exactly that property. You send it with your request, and you get it back with a response. Now, in 2012, when we redesigned the way tokens are handled, we came up with a hard limit for the size of a token. We wanted to make it 8 bytes or less. And we discussed, is having a hard limit a good idea there? And we couldn't come up with a use case where we would need a larger token. So that's where we are. And instead, stateless proxy option was invented, but it turns out this stateless proxy option has a few problems in case there are further proxies on the way. So the JRC might actually be in a rack somewhere making a lot of noise, and this guy here might actually be a proxy that forwards the data to the actual JRC. So we had to redefine this option, and because we are all thinking in terms of tokens now, we are calling it the second token option. And it's a critical option, like the token is, and it's not safe to forward, like the token is. And yeah, that works. It's fine. There are 2 tokens in a message. the one that is always used for the request response matching, and the second token. And you actually have to produce a little bit of redundancy here to make that happen. So yeah, just to show how this looks like in the 6-dish case, this shows an OSCORE option, just because in 6-dish you would have an OSCORE option, but this option here is separate, independent of the usage of OSCORE. This is just an example showing it in the 6-dish context. So you would have a token 1 that is up to 8 bytes long, and everything else that doesn't fit there would go into this token 2 option, which would have the number 19. CoREP options are differentially encoded, so 9 plus 10 is 19. And that is the information that you hope the origin server or the next proxy sends back to you. So this is now all not new, except that it has a new option, but having a new option is something that is very normal, routine for CoREP. We make it easy to define new options. So that's one way. The other way is to experience severe remorse about not having provided larger tokens in 2013, and think about how would the design in 2013 or 2012 have looked like. And actually, it's pretty obvious that we would have designed the token with the same option length mechanism that we use for options. So this is kind of, I mean, if you think about it for a while, this is the only design that makes sense. So that would be trying to repair the mistake of limiting the token length to 8. So the problem with this, of course, is, first of all, it's a change in a place where we didn't deliberately place an extension point. So implementers were not aware that this change was looming. They are very aware that they have to handle new options. So every CoREP implementation has a way to handle new options. But this is new stuff. This has to be actually changed. And that's not a problem in the 6-dish environment, because these are very constrained systems. They have full control over their implementations. They are not just slapping a random library on top of their stuff. They really have to do this in a very tight way. So for the 6-dish people, this works very well. But if we think about this as a general thing we are doing to the CoREP ecosystem, we have to be a little bit more careful. Yeah, so for instance, we have to think about situations like this. And in the 6-dish case, we also have to check whether there is a random CoREP forwarding node on the way that maybe actually doesn't support extended tokens. And that's actually much more so for anybody else who is trying to use this extension, because we have no way to signal the presence of this extension. For options, we have this critical versus elective thing, and we have the 400, 400 answer, and so on. Actually, violating the token length would also give you a 400 answer, so it's not that much different. But it's doing the right thing way too late, or doing something that's not quite right, but is within the expectations that implementers might have. So if we go forward with doing the right thing, we would write a draft that updates 7252 and 8323, because that's the two documents that define how a token goes into the header, one for UDP, one for TCP. For TCP, we could actually put in a capability, so that would be, we wouldn't have extensibility issues there because we have signaling there, but for UDP, we don't have signaling, and we have to think about whether we do this, and also how we communicate this as a special purpose thing that's just for our 6-dish customers, or as a general extension that we recommend the entire CoAP ecosystem to go along. Dave.
Dave Taylor. So I think this is a decent idea. I hesitate to say good, but there is no good way to solve it, right? And I followed everything up until slide 9 where you lost me, which is the one right before that one. And so here is the a clarifying question is when you're talking about a client or intermediary needs to perform a stateful request. Are you assuming that this is a device that has the capability of, meaning that a client or intermediary in the role of a client, that thing has the capability of doing either stateful or stateless, both? And so it tries one and it can fall back on something. If it notices that the next top does not support stateful, then it's happy to just, if it does not support stateless, then it's happy to fall back and just use a stateful one and keep state. Is that the assumption here?
Yeah, so the way this would work in practice is that an implementation would keep exactly one state, one place for state. So when it comes up and it prepares for being a stateless forwarding proxy, it tries doing the stateless thing once. It exercises the protocol machinery for stateless, but keeps the state to be able to handle errors.
So that's the part that I'm a little bit more skeptical about. I still think the rest of the stuff that you talked about may still be worth doing. But let's take a case of an intermediary in the role of a client. So, and so you're saying it's not just the client, an intermediary needs to. If it's an intermediary, then only keeping one means that there may be other ones that come in because you're the intermediary that come in. And so that means you're going to drop them anyway, right? Because you're an intermediary,
Actually,
right? So having a queue length of 1 has problems for intermediaries, just like it does with, say, ERP packets.
Yeah, actually, the doing this without having support is not catastrophic. These are all non-conformable.
I would rather keep it simple and just say, if a client asks for a stateless one and the whole path doesn't, you get a failure, you get an error.
Yes, the problem is you may have no way to tell the client that you just got a failure, because if you don't have state, how do you do this?
That's the part where you lost me. I don't know if it's just me, but
so the point is the forwarding proxy knows nothing about the fact that this ever happened when it has sent this message. So when this
when
guy
you get the error back, you're saying you
failure,
can't forward the error because it doesn't know where to forward it to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the classical ICMP problem we're having.
Right. So I don't like this. My point was this slide was a little bit underspecified, and so I had to ask you to elaborate on what you meant the design would be. Regardless of all these different design approaches and stuff, this may still be the least bad option no matter which way that we go there. It's just you have to deal with the cases where the path changes in the middle of things, and so meaning your next hop, is it still the next hop by the time that the reply comes back? And I don't know. So
these are weird forward proxies.
Yeah.
So every hop is aware of the next hop. So those don't just change. You know when they change.
They can change. You just know when they change.
Yes.
Okay, Dave Robin, 3 things. This slide is very scary. I don't understand why do you not have a red line? What is the short-circuited red line on proxy 3? Why does it not also have to go to the ultimate server, because the token has to go all the way to the end and come back? Or is he a stateful server?
It does go to the ultimate server, but maybe this guy is already somewhere in the rack and making.
Okay, maybe that guy's stateful. Okay, that's why he's okay. So second point is, it seems that there's no alternative. The poor client is he's dead in the water. I don't like this. I mean, he just can't get his message through if somebody in between is not stateful. So as much as your layering of the additional token in there, it takes up room, it's big, it's extra stuff in the packet. but it works, doesn't it?
It does.
It works in all cases. The client puts it in there, or not
No,
the
no.
original client, but the proxy. The proxy puts it in there.
It doesn't work in all cases because it's critical and not safe to forward. So if the next guy doesn't support the option, you are exactly in the same situation you are in when it doesn't support the extended token.
Well, that was my third question. Is you said that tokens are not safe to forward, and yet you're forwarding the token in order to be stateless.
Safe to forward means safe to forward without knowing what it means. That's a very short word. So for proxies, we have critical and elective options.
Right.
And originally, we thought that would be all we need. But the problem is that there are options that the proxy doesn't have to understand, but the end has to understand. And if we only have a critical bit and set that, then the first proxy who doesn't understand the option sends back an error. So that's why we have a second bit, the safe to forward bit, which essentially means, is this elective for the proxy to understand, or is it critical for the proxy to understand?
Right.
And not safe to forward means it's critical for the proxy to also understand it.
Okay. It's ugly. I like your third point there. Yeah. I don't know how to solve it, but it appears that layering is perhaps a safer thing to do, even though it takes up more bits on the wire. And it's ironic because I just got off a conference call where we did the same thing. We had 3 bits that we've reserved, and we wanted to extend them since 1995, and we realized there's so many implementations that will barf. We decided not to extend that and to embed an actual length. In other words, it's a fake length up there that everyone will accept and forward. The actual length then is embedded inside the payload, which those in the know handle like this. So, I mean, it's ironic. It's a problem solved in the same way.
So I think we have a typical cognitive dissonance problem here that we know this is the right way to do it, and we'd rather do it, but we know that there are at least communication problems here. I think in the end, the actual problems on the wire are not going to be very much different, but there are communication problems that we have to explain to people that we are actually changing the structure of the 4-byte header a little bit and allowing numbers there 9 to 15 or 9 to 14 actually that haven't been allowed before.
Well, that was the other thing though, do you think implementations will reject them, or will they jump 13 bytes ahead and then misinterpret the rest of the packet?
I don't know whether that has been tested. I mean, in interop testing, it never occurs. In compliance testing, it would.
Right.
So I don't think we have any survey information. Well, I know that my implementation checks it, but yeah. So how do we decide this? So what Klaus proposes here is to actually write this up. And maybe in particular, write up slide 9, because this is really confusing on the slide. You have to have text explaining that. And the Sextish people have given us a little bit of time here to do this, because they essentially have to have the final solution before IETF 103. So we can tinker with this a little bit, but we shouldn't sit too long on it. So yes.
Just this idea of not being able to, Dave Robin again, not being able to recover at all is the problem that's just bothering me. I'm the client and I just can't get my message through because you don't support any state whatsoever. That's not a degraded state. That's an impossible state. So my aha perhaps is that you have 1 or 2 slots for state, and if you can't do the stateless because the guy ahead of you doesn't, then you start dropping stuff. But maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes go by, things will recover, and actually your message will get through.
Right.
So that's a degraded state, but it's one that ultimately works.
Yes.
This seems to not work at all because I refuse to keep any state whatsoever, and therefore I will never send your message.
Yeah, with the amendment to actually keep one state, you know there is forward progress. Of course, in a 6-dish environment, you would expect to see more than one light bulb. And so you would just, if you don't get an answer from the first one, you don't retransmit to that guy, you try another one first.
Dave Taylor, one other question about this slide. Is there actually a case where the client needs a token larger than 8? I understand the issues about the intermediary. There's the error on the client side, and I understand the intermediary case, which is why I picked on that one before. I just can't think of a use case for clients. Can you?
Well, a client might actually also be in the same situation. I mean, a client has some connection to the physical world, and the physical world may place more requests on the client than the client actually can handle.
Okay,
so
let
for
me
the client to be able to use this,
I think I understand your answer.
It helps.
It sounds like your answer is when the CoAP client is acting as an intermediary between CoAP and something else, and he's trying to keep state or be stateless with the something else.
Which most devices do in some form. I mean, we call them things because they are between the physical world and the digital world.
Most devices, but not necessarily most CoAP clients, right? If you're a human interface thing, like a remote controlled device, like your slide clicker or something like that, there's no need. Okay, but if you're proxying to some other protocol where you're trying to keep state because you have to respond to, then I understand that. So when writing this up in more detail, then yeah, make sure that's clarified.
Matthias Kovac, I just had to think about nstart equals 1. So if you have this constraint device that doesn't support COCO or whatever, why would it start sending out multiple requests and is not able to save the state? Because it must to have implemented COCO or some other mechanism anyway, and this is a kind of stronger device.
Well, the situation is that we actually have additional clients talking to this guy.
That's the contention for the one slot. Yeah.
But the question was, will one client need this feature to send out multiple requests without being able to preserve the state? And it actually is only allowed to send out multiple requests. Right, it's a different destination. Yeah, sorry.
Right. That's a good question, but I think the answer is we do have this problem. Okay, so to me it seems there is sufficient sympathy for this approach in the room that is worth that the authors actually write this up. And we look at this within a limited time. I'm not going to try to describe the timeline here from scratch, but yeah, this has to be done quickly. Who would be able to review, who would be willing to review a draft, even if it comes at an unpleasant time in August? Peter, Jim, Dave Robin. Okay, that's at least something. Good. So maybe that's all we can do today. Okay. Next, too many responses. A problem that's not unrelated.
Okay, yes, related problem, too many requests, response code for CoAP. Quick recap on this. So background on this issue is that the CoAP client can cause a server overload by doing too frequent requests. We need a mechanism for a server to tell the client to back off. This originally came obvious problem in the CoAP PubSub broker draft, but after that we found quite a bit of other uses for it too, so it seems to be making sense to standardize a response code for that. And HTTP already has a related response code, so it was easy to take some inspiration from it. So this was first presented in the previous IETF, did a few changes since it, and it was also very good last call, and I think the last call ended about today. So the changes on the very good last call comments were that we added a hint on action payloads. So also an error code can have a payload telling the client, okay, what would be the right way of actions forward. We are not defining in this draft any particular payload format, but just hinted that you can use one. Then there was a slightly bigger thing that whereas the original version was saying that you cannot do the same request again if you do get this error code, there was a point taken that maybe also similar requests should be able to be suppressed with this error code. So a bit more details on this slide. This was originally a comment from Abhian on the mailing list. That, for example, if you do something like stream pattern use cases, that is a draft including RG, you wouldn't be actually doing the same request that is causing the overall subtle variations. That the request URIs may not be identical, but they are still related. And it seems to be useful that this same error code could also be used in that kind of cases. Of course, now the challenge comes, so how do you know what is same request and what is a similar request? So since this specification cannot define all the cases when the requests are similar, we are suggesting here that it could be part of application specification. Or potentially it could also be one of these action payloads that tell, hey, these are the okay ways to go. So this original functionality that if the request is identical, is still remaining, it was just extended to also cover the potential case of similar requests. And that was all that was done for this draft. And there was also one unfortunate typo, but that's going to be fixed in the next revision.
Okay, so this is another one of those customer-induced drafts, because we have other people who would like to use this, including other SDOs. So we should not delay this unnecessary. Yeah, my question would be, can we work on Glass Call this now?
No, we did.
We did.
The last call ended today.
We did. Do we have to work on Glass Call again? No, you didn't change anything. Did you get any responses?
The same versus similar.
Yeah.
I guess it's worth having a quick look, but it seems so far non-controversial. So yes, I'll do one update fixing the typo, but I think after that we are good to go forward.
Yeah, from an architectural point, what happens here, this is actually a message to the application that it should be nicer to the server. And it's the application that also would know what similar might mean. This is not something that happens in the core stack. The actual reaction to this response code would happen in the application. So architecturally, I'm happy with using something that's very wizard-worthy from the point of view of the core stack. The core stack has no idea, but it doesn't have to.
And of course, I mean, before we hit the publish button, all reviews are very welcome. Like, it's a very short draft. It's just a couple of pages, so it will take you 2 minutes to read. But if there's something that is worth clarifying, it's good to clarify now rather than with IESG discusses.
So in Peter.
Peter van der Stok, I'm sorry, but the related is not very clear to me. And how are you going to define it? Will this be in table? Will it be in table format specified? And you leave things open. For example, resources part of some collection. That one I might find how I could define it, but one can think so many things. So it's a bit vague.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point, that it would be up to the application to have that knowledge. Alternatively, we could say that this method only applies if the request is identical. That was the original. And that's, of course, one way we could go forward. But the downside, I mean, so you would not have to use this similar method at all. It's only for the application where it actually makes sense. And in that case, the application would need to have some way of telling, for example, it's part of a bigger specification that, okay, in these cases, you would also send this response code. But you are right, out of blue, the co-op stack would not be able to know it. It would need to have additional application layer information. But that would be, we cannot, at least with the current mechanisms, it seems we cannot, in a general fashion, define in this spec what is similar enough. So it's better to leave it for the additional specifications using this. But yes, of course, the alternative is that we only keep the identical one and go forward with that. But that may be, unfortunately, kind of restricts the use cases for this code.
Okay.
So I would go, if there's no big concerns, go forward with the similar. But please do read the description, and if it needs clarification, let's clarify it.
So to me, it seems that the right way forward is for you to fix the typo and for the chairs to ship this to the ISG. And there is an IETF last call, so if you find another problem, there is still a way to raise that. So but it's leaving the working group. So that would be my proposal. Anybody here having a big problem with that? Okay, wonderful.
Thanks.
So there are two more housekeeping type drafts. One is about media type, a content format that allows to aggregate several payloads into one, including the case that you aggregate 0 payloads into one because you want to say you don't have anything at this point in time. So this document was adopted. It replaces a number of proposals, including the maybe thing, and it nicely resurrects something we originally wanted to do in 2012, but at the time we didn't really have CBOR widely available, so we couldn't do that. So is it time for working group last call here? Any objections to going to working group last call? That's not my decision, then it's Jaime's decision, so talk to Jaime about that.
Me again, Peter van Stok, very much in favor of working group last call, but there's another thing. We have done content formats which are defined in ESD COAP-S, and they have asked for a preliminary publication, which has been done. We're very grateful for that. But also this one, we would like to have a preliminary request for registration also of this content format. Am I clear?
Yes. Okay, so that's another thing you have to ask Jaime. Or actually, I have to ask you that?
I don't know that actually.
You have to read the procedure, but there is a procedure for that, and we just follow it.
I can send an email.
Yeah, let's follow that procedure.
Very good.
But I agree that this is the right thing to do.
Maybe Alexei has an opinion about the re-registration actually.
Alexei will follow the procedure, I think. There's nothing special about that.
Repeat the question.
Early allocation of a code point for this?
Yes, what's about it?
Okay, enough.
We will just, you will get away in a couple of days asking for early allocation.
Okay, I just went through this with the exact same registry. Are you going to ask for something in 0 to 255?
I have no idea what the draft says. What does the draft say? Does
I don't
anybody
remember.
have it?
If it's in 0 to 255, you don't need an early registration. Just ask the DE.
All right.
If it's above if it's 255 to something, then you need an early registration.
Okay. Let's take this offline, but we will do whatever is needed to get Peter his code. Okay. So the prerequisite for this, to make this clear, is that this working group thinks this will happen. So we are going into working group last call with the assumption the working group last call will succeed. If that assumption is not warranted, we should not ask for early allocation. So that's why I'm asking this right now. Okay. One more housekeeping draft. Now, this is something that we have been talking about for about 5 years now. And somehow, finally, someone found the time to write this up. There are about 1,400 media types, definitely less than 2,000. We have 6,500 available content format numbers. And right now, anybody who wants to use COAP with a new media type has to do all this registry stuff. And the idea is to just go ahead and waste some code points and say, okay, all those media types that theoretically can be registered, that there are some for which it doesn't make sense because they have mandatory parameters. But all other media types, we just allocate content format numbers for, 2-byte content format numbers. So we take away one threshold that is currently in the way of people using CoAP. And it's often actually the only threshold. It's a low threshold, but it's still a threshold. So, for instance, Peter wouldn't have to had to do anything for the CoAP ESD thing because it would all have been pre-registered.
Okay, can you do one sentence summary what problem you're trying to address?
The threshold.
Say it again?
The threshold. The problem is in the mind of the person who is trying to decide whether they should do something in CoAP or do it in HTTP. And they find they can do it in HTTP now, but they have to exercise some registry they don't understand to get a content format.
Right, so it's an extra step, an extra burden for them.
Yes.
If it's not allocated. Okay, I see. Right.
So many of you will know this discussion because, again, we have been discussing this for quite some time. And now the proposal is to actually do it. Who has seen this draft? Has anybody read it? 2 people. Wow. Okay. The 2 who have read it, who of you thinks this draft is ready for adoption? No, I can't ask this question. Sorry. You have to ask it.
I mean, only the 2 of you have read the draft. Do you have an opinion on it that you would like to voice out in the mic?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think it's a right thing to do. It sounded like a bad idea first when I heard about it, but then when you read the justification in the draft, I think it makes a fair point that yes, it makes sense.
All right, Matthias.
Matthias Kovac. So unfortunately, didn't have the time to read this yet, but I continuously ran into the problem that I didn't have a valid content format code point for that. People were asking me, people were picking really weird numbers for that because they need it and they have no clue how to get it. And they are kind of too unrelated to the IETF to really know what is the procedure.
So the squatting is a very real problem.
Does anybody have a particular problem with adopting this draft? All right, then maybe we can do a call for working on the question on the mailing list and check out later. And please read it and have an opinion.
So we have quite a few agenda items, and we are 3 minutes over our time. So let me just say one thing. CBOR has decided to do more interims, and I think we should follow their lead. So the idea would be that we have a virtual interim at approximately the first time the rules allow us to have it, and move a few more things forward. So I think it's not a disaster that we don't get to these things now. We can pick it up in the next virtual interim. And we have to decide the details for that. We used to have virtual interims, quite a few earlier on, and even a physical one, but we haven't done this, and I think with this backlog, we have to start doing it again. So with that small consolation for the people who have come here to present their work, I'm afraid we will have to close the meeting. So see you all in Bangkok, and hopefully see you all in the virtual interim before that. Where is Carlos?